like to start my talk today with a story about a little library in a cramped daycare classroom. I remember walking into that daycare classroom actually carrying the bookshelf of the library, which was way too wide to fit in the doorframe. But what was more important about this story than just the bookshelf or the kids reading it was the fact that my arms weren't sore and I was able to put the bookshelf down in the corner and the kids ran right up to it. After mumbling the thank yous that their teacher instructed them to give to me, they ran through my legs, around my other side, and they immediately grabbed the book, which attracted their attention the most. These books were all about topics like environmental conservation, about leading figures in that field, and about ecological diversity. And seeing the look on these kids' faces as they grabbed the books, about books they never had before, never had access to, they didn't have the resources for, and they looked up at me with a twinkle in their eye, and I knew that I was actually making a change within my community. Granted, it might have been small and on the local level, but any change matters. And I was able to help their community and be part of their everyday life. And community to me isn't simply just a bookshelf in a small daycare classroom. Rather, it started for me when I was a kid in my backyard. Community for me was 3 rectangular planters, which my dad bought for me at Home Depot. And they consisted of tomato plants, basil, and oregano. And while I'm sure my parents wanted me to find a community of people, I think they settled for the fact that my plants were living. And although they were living, they weren't for long. I completely overwatered all of those plants and they died in their pots. But instead of actually focusing on what the tomatoes produced or how many basil leaves I ended up with at the end of the night, I was more focused on, especially reflecting now, the fact that I was growing something from nothing. Even if I didn't end up with fruit, just seeing the leaves on the branches was something that I was going to treasure. And especially now, reflecting back on my high school career, I realized that the first time I ever pursued environmental science, or even gardening in a more academic sense, was in my 9th grade AP Environmental Science class. This class introduced me to a lot of different topics that finally put words to the topics that I was so interested in as a child. I learned about what it meant to be ecologically diverse, what a food chain really meant, or even what happens when we do cellular respiration in our bodies and we break down glucose. And granted, I wasn't just interested in environmental science for the STEM. I was more interested in it for the interdisciplinary study that it offered me. I really loved history as a kid. I loved reading books, and getting to understand the effect that humans had on the environment was something that I was going to treasure for the rest of my life. I mean, we learn about things like nuclear power, right? And we know that they're environmentally friendly, and we know that although they have some, radioactive decay at the end of the day, it's more sustainable than carbon-based fuels. But instead of just thinking about that, I thought more about what the perception of progress looked. I mean, nuclear power looks good in the sense that, we're producing more energy and we're moving forward technologically. But what about the water used to cool those reactors? Well, that warm water has to go somewhere, and it's dumped immediately into the lakes, rivers, and reservoirs that they came from. And that leads to deoxygenation of the water, and those plants and animals die because they don't have enough oxygen. And this topic was something that I really wanted to pursue when I came into high school, and I ended up doing things such as volunteering or even creating those libraries. I mean, I was able to pursue things that I never really would have thought possible in the sense. I mean, I was able to find community at my local nature center, teaching kids about different endangered animals, holding endangered chinchillas where kids can pet their 400 hairs per follicle, or having a ball python wrapped around my arm like I was Superman. Seeing the kids so interested in something that they never had seen before was something that, again, I was going to treasure for the rest of my life and continue to pursue. And that was what actually led me to my independent project of creating the libraries. I mean, I partnered with local community bookstores and libraries, and I set up donation bins. And in trying to build a community at these daycare centers for the kids, I figured I would ask my community for help. I said, I'm looking to build a community full of education, environmental diversity, and promote different understanding of the world around us. And the community did not fail me. I raised over $500 and 75 used books to curate these bookshelves at the daycare center. And seeing those kids' faces and seeing them interested in learning about something that they never had access for was going to become a foundational part to who I am and what I continue to do today. And parallel to my interest in environmental science, I also began art. I mean, as a kid, I was always the kid that was great at coloring in the lines, right? I knew that red faded well into orange, and then you could use the complementary color of blue to create contrast. But high school art class was something different. It wasn't just a graduation requirement to me. It was a place where I found a different community, one that not only I had to create, but one that was going to help me be part of it. I mean, my art class is sitting here today, and they literally inspired me to do half of the artwork that I have. I mean, without them, and without them pushing me to delve deeper into my interests, I don't know where I would be today. I mean, Miss Sid Lowski, who coached me on forming my thesis for my AT Studio art project, or the thread that ties all of my future projects together, she told me, and I'll summarize because I don't remember her exact words, to go back to what I was first interested in, what I can remember first being passionate about. And what I immediately went back to was my garden, was volunteering. And I knew that I needed to do something about environmental science, and I needed to do something about conservation and promote more education about that subject. And art offered me a place to express my voice in a sense that wasn't just talking. I mean, if any of you guys know me personally, you know I love to talk, and I'll talk for hours about anything on end. But art was more intentional. I could use my art to say something that I wasn't able to just in person. I could reflect ideas that you can't just say in words. And that led me to create one of my largest projects of probably my lifetime, that being my artwork, Poisoned by Progress. Just to kind of explain what the artwork is, in the center you'll see a really ornate vase, and that is to represent our traditional values of a human society. And out of the vase you'll see growing really pretty flowers. And granted, while they may look pretty on the surface, I specifically chose flowers like belladonna because they are poisonous to human beings. And above the plants you'll see 3 plastic water bottles feeding water, feeding life into these poisonous flowers. And in the background you'll see 2 politicians shaking hands in front of the US Capitol building. The gold leaf also represents the glorification of the destruction of our environment and the poisoning of our own ideals in human society. And specifically, if you would have noticed, the background was blue. And I chose that medium specifically because it's called cyanotype. It's when you put UV reactive chemical on a canvas and a stencil over top of it, so that way when you use a UV machine, the stencil will appear and you will have your artwork in the blue font. But what I didn't expect was that Ms. Sid would encourage me to pursue art in a more competitive sense, uploading my art to the congressional art competition just for laughs. I mean, I didn't think I'd win. I didn't even know it existed until Ms. Sid had told me about it. So imagine my surprise when my mom calls me and I'm getting yelled at because I've just been invited to the US Capitol by our local congressman because he selected my artwork. That was a difficult conversation to have and a lot of explaining I had to do. But I'm standing there in the US Capitol, months later after being selected, standing in front of my artwork, smiling for pictures, but the only thing I can think about is that garden, is the bookshelf, is my environmental science class. And I realized that although I'm so passionate about environmental science and I love working with art, what really was reflective to me about all of it was the fact that I was using my voice. And I was using my voice not just to talk. I mean, granted, I could talk about anything, but using my voice intentionally and in different methods is something that I think is so creative and is so important that we do in our society today. I mean, whether it's artwork, whether it's literature, whether it's education, whether it's talking at a TED Talk, I mean, using your voice in any way possible to create real change within your community, national, local, or even just education about topics that you're passionate about is something that I implore each and every one of you to pursue in your own lives. I mean, it's one thing to learn about a topic, it's another thing to actually do something about it, right? You can learn about math, you can learn about engineering, but who's gonna land that plane, who's gonna land that spaceship on Mars if you're not the one to engineer it? Who's gonna create the newest Michelin star restaurant if you're not the one to cook the meals? You have to have the passion for a subject, just like I did about environmental science and art, and you have to find your own way to express your voice to get what you want. Otherwise, it's just useless. You gotta find your voice in any way possible and use it to pursue whatever you want. And whether that's the intersection of art, the intersection of politics, the environment, mathematics, engineering, literature, there's any combination of roads that you can take throughout your life. It just matters about finding the intersection that's right for you and using your voice to call yourself to that exact spot. Thank you.